Welcome to the show. I'm Doug Johnson, and this is The Business of Life. During each show, we highlight a local personality who has some strategies for success to share with us. Today's guest is an educator, a business owner, and a counselor. He has graduate degrees from Case Western Reserve University's Weatherhead School in Positive Organizational Development and Change, and Adult Learning and Development from Cleveland State University. He is an accredited financial counselor and workshop presenter, and presently is also serving as an assistant professor of business at Cuyahoga Community College. Our guest today is Johnie Reed. Johnie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Doug.
I'm so happy that you're here today.
Thank you.
As you know, we've talked about a lot of things through the time that we've known each other.
Yeah.
And so today, I'm really excited that you're joining us to talk about some of the things that are important to you. But first, before we do that, let's start from the beginning. What is your authentic backstory? What do you do? How did you get there? So on and so forth.
Well, Doug, my backstory goes way back.
Okay.
I'm much older than I look.
Oh, right.
Grew up in Cleveland.
Uh-huh.
Dad passed away when I was 12, single mom, a lot of siblings. I have 7 siblings.
Okay.
Grew up in the city, just doing what we can do to make ends meet, right? At some point, my godfather, who lived actually next door to us, I let him take me under his wing. I fought it for years, right? As a young kid, he's trying to teach me to do the right thing. My dad had passed. I don't want to hear this guy. Right? So I fought it for a number of years, and then he finally got hold of me, if you will. He taught me all about integrity. He taught me about character. He taught me about the idea or the concept of being ethical, right? And throughout that process, he was teaching me construction. He was a handyman, we called it back then. He could build anything, and the guy was above reproach. I was blessed to have him in my life to kind of put me on the right track.
Right.
And that led to me becoming the person who I am today. He guided me from the time I was probably 13, 14, up to my early 20s. And a lot of the traits that he showed me, I use them to this very day. It helps me be a better person. And some days it's really hard to be a better person.
Right, I know that feeling.
It's very difficult. So that gave me this idea, this, how would I say, this desire to help others.
Okay.
Which led to my community engagement and all the things I do within the community.
Okay. You have made a comment, and we'll get back to the community things in a moment. But you've made a comment to me that life is a business. Can you enlarge upon that, and what do you mean by that?
Well, think about what we do every day. And for those that haven't been in business, they may not be able to embrace the concept that I share. But every day we do budgeting. Every day we do some type of networking or marketing for ourselves. Every day we're promoting our business, the business of self. Whether it's through the work that we do on the job, the community engagement that we have, how we deal with our neighbors and friends. That is what business does. You develop your stakeholders and hope that they stay with you throughout the long run. Right? So at the end of the day, when you think about the individual person, every person does that for themselves, whether it's strongly positive or marginal. But we're all trying to build these relationships.
Right, and in building the relationships, you've just mentioned community, and you were very involved as a volunteer in a number of parts of the community. Can you talk about your volunteerism and why volunteerism is so important, not only in our community, but in any community?
Well, for me, if you believe in your space, that's wherever you live, wherever you reside, you have to try to make your space a better place. And many times when you look at volunteering, it's something that you do with a nonprofit. All the volunteering I do is nonprofit work. I am trying to help people understand the value of giving back. You know, as I mentioned my godfather earlier,
Right.
you know, our civic responsibility is not just to pay our taxes, but to do things that will help the community blossom, grow, prosper. And don't be misled by the fact that I'm only one person. It's like when they talk about the vote, I only have one vote, it doesn't matter. Every vote matters.
Right, it does.
Every vote counts, right?
Yes.
Same with this volunteerism, Doug. You know, when you're looking at developing or growing your community, you have to give them what you already know, what you understand, so that that can prosper other people.
So, Johnny, go back for a moment if you would, because you've talked about your godfather kind of planting the seeds of an ethical, moral life and about helping others. How did he do that? I mean, did you just sit down and say, okay, Johnny, this is what you need to do, or?
No.
Okay.
He watched me grow up. His name was James Mosley. He passed years ago, but he watched me grow up, and I think he knew more about me than I realized about myself.
Okay.
I was obstinate as a kid.
No.
Yeah, I was a tough cookie. Didn't want to take direction. If it's something I did not want to do, whether it was for good or not, I was like, I'm not doing it. So my mother and I were always at odds. She was trying to get me to do the right thing, you know, from her perspective, and I didn't see it. So because I couldn't see it, I couldn't take that information and use it for anything tangible. Over the years, I think, you know, my godfather, he watched me. So when he began to work with me, in the disguise of me working with him for pay,
Okay.
he taught me these things over the course of years. I would watch how he interacted with his customers. I would watch how he interacted in the neighborhood. You know, I would watch the things that he did. You know, this man had a business, and he would do work at no cost for people that were struggling. And just because you're struggling, that doesn't mean your water heater shouldn't work.
Right.
So he would buy and replace water heaters for certain people. And in doing those things over a number of years, it began to show me the value of helping others, as well as the value of understanding that community has value. Because many of those people would come back later and do something really great for him. Whether it was, you know, they had a garden, brought in vegetables. He was a vegetable man. He ate vegetables, and he had a great garden. So he did it himself. But, you know, people would show their appreciation. And the thing that I began to see with that appreciation is a lot of people that would do that were typically people that did not share. They did not have enough to offer someone else to begin with. And because of what he did, they found a way to engage at a different level, if that makes sense to you.
That's really kind of powerful, isn't it?
It became very powerful for me because it helped me understand that many times we're not, we don't control our process as much as we think we do. There's many people that are victims of circumstance. And I'm not saying that being a victim of circumstance means you have to stay in that circumstance. But what I am sharing with you is that a hand up sometimes gets you to move forward, helps you move forward. And I think that's what he did for a lot of people. He gave them a hand up, which helped them move forward. So my volunteering is kind of based on that.
And I think maybe the way that hand up is given is so important also. Making the person feel good, and then in return, they do something good for that person. It's amazing, isn't it? Kind of the old saying, you know, what goes around comes around. It's so important.
Yeah, it is. Well, you know, part of my philosophy in life now is the Starfish Philosophy. I don't know if you know about the little poem about the little kid on the beach, you know, one morning, and it's full of starfish. There's starfish that have washed up on the beach.
Right.
And the little kid is walking down the beach throwing starfish back in the ocean, right? A guy comes along and says, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm helping these starfish. Say, there's thousands of them. You can't help them all, right? Well, he picks up a starfish, throws in there. I can help that one, and I can help that one. And that's kind of my philosophy. You know, I teach every day. I have hundreds of students every semester, but I can help. When I can help one, I'm doing good. And I try to look at my community service the same way. You know, although we're doing it from a different perspective. As far as the one, typically when you do community service, you're helping many more people with
Right.
each toss of the starfish per se, right? So I use that analogy to kind of stay grounded.
And it's a really neat analogy.
Yeah.
And I've heard that before, and just now you relating that again, that is very powerful and very important for all of us to remember.
All of us to remember, right? All of us should remember that for every one person that you help, they're going to help someone else. Now it becomes this process where it's like compound interest, right?
Exactly.
You leave the money there, you let it work, and it begins to build itself, build upon itself. And that's the value of volunteering from my perspective.
And it's also kind of paying it forward.
It's paying it forward. Yeah, every day.
Nice.
Every
Nice. Nice.
Beautiful.
Now, you are on the board of the Neighborhood Leadership Institute, and you were in the class 17 a number of years ago.
Yeah, a number of years ago.
I think they're up to class 35 this year.
32, 35, somewhere in there, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the program's been around for a while.
Oh, absolutely.
And obviously, from the brochure that I looked at for the program, the 5 fundamental elements that one learns about grassroots leadership are basically clarifying your purpose, know what you're about, fostering authentic relationships. And I think the key word there is authentic.
Yes.
Leading with others through collaboration. Oh my gosh, don't we need that today?
A lot more of it today.
We sure do.
Positive collaboration, though.
Positive, very positive. Cultivating accountability in yourself and in others. And transformation, inspiring and being inspired by change. So those are the 5 elements of leadership, grassroots leadership. You are also on another board. You're on the foundation of the Twinsburg Public Library.
Yes.
And I'm very proud to serve with you on that board.
I serve with you, actually.
And we serve together, Johnny. We serve together. One of the things that you did at the Twinsburg Public Library before being on the board was to start a spelling bee contest with children.
Yes.
I always thought that was quite powerful, and it goes along with your mentorship program. How do the 5 elements of leadership figure into the spelling bee contest and being on the board of the foundation?
Well, it goes back to what I shared with you earlier about the things that my Godfather shared with me. You know, beginning to understand your purpose. You know, as a young person, I found out early on that for some reason, people just came to me and they shared information with me. They asked for my advice, for my guidance.
Excuse me, Johnny, that's called a magnetic personality.
Oh, that's what it is?
That's what it is.
Well, I'm very magnetic. I think it's just grace, personally. I think I was blessed with this, I guess this sense or this ability that people thought that I could help.
Okay.
And, you know, if it's magnetism, that's fantastic. I think, you know, when you have a gift, you have to begin to clarify and understand its purpose. So as I was coming up and people would come to me and they would share their concerns, their problems, what they were going through, their struggles, and I would give them advice, that began to help me understand that it was not so much about me as it was about others.
Right.
And in helping others, I found fulfillment. You know, I found this gratification that was more tangible to me than many other things that I've done or can do, I think, because I see the growth in others. That's what led to the spelling bee.
Well, Let me just interject here, if I
Please.
might. At what age did folks start coming to you for advice?
Wow, Doug.
Because I think oftentimes we think of a sage person being older and having life experience. And I'm not sure that's always the case. And I wonder if it was in your case, or if you started giving advice at a younger age.
I was very young. And it's interesting when you talk about the idea of experience. As a child, I mean, 8, 9, 10, my parents, their friends, they used to talk to me like I was a pastor. They were like, "You're going to be a pastor. You have this thing in you. You're a preacher. You're a preacher. You're a preacher." I thought that was a daunting responsibility, and still do. But it was happening even then, because people came to me for, lack of a better term, consultation. I didn't understand it. I just shared with people what I thought, and it typically worked out well for them. So it started very, very early. And again, leading to the idea of clarification and understanding purpose, that's why I mentor. That's why I do things like the spelling bee. Even with Neighborhood Leadership Institute, they have a program called True to You, and it deals with mentoring 8th graders in the Cleveland School District. The program is fantastic. When you begin to think about how you can share your experiences, right? Whether you're, 18 or 80, you come in and talk to 8th graders about what you've done and how you've made it through that process to get to where you are today. For me, going backwards, didn't have a lot of experiences to begin with, but I think I had a lot of grace again, and I was able to share with people what they needed to know, unbeknownst to me, and it was always helpful for the most part.
Well, and that's so important for you to realize that you had this within you, and that other folks recognized that also.
Yeah.
So back to the spelling bee. How did you come up with that? Why did you come up with that? And we're starting to see a pattern here, I think.
Well, the spelling bee was just something that I was probably in a meeting or something, and something that in one of the community organizations that I deal with, and it was probably mentioned, and spelling bee, that would be great. And it kind of sat around in my mind for a while until one day in our village, we had a community day, and some people from the library were there. And I said, "Hey, this is a great opportunity." Spoke with the young woman, and I can't remember her name today, and I apologize for that. We had a great conversation, and she was all on board with it. Next thing I know, we had a couple of meetings, and the first annual spelling bee took place a few years ago.
Great.
And it's been a great experience for the young people. I think beginning to get young people to think more critically.
How important.
Yeah.
I mean, that is critical.
It's critical.
That they think critically.
Absolutely.
And
Right.
you're right. I think such an important thing for people today to be aware of and to know how to do.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there's enough of that going on around us today.
Well, why would you have to, right? And I think that's the thought process for many people. I just go day to day, and my day to day is fine. But at some point, you have to, in my opinion, you have to be an activist for your own benefit, for your own growth, and for the growth of the community around you. Even if you just look at community as your immediate family. How do you do better by them without critical thought, right?
There's another thing, Johnie, that I'd like to touch on with you, and you've mentioned this several times, and I'm thinking that our audience probably has not heard this term very often. But what is the theory and the practice of appreciative inquiry?
Pretty much everything I was talking about.
Right.
AI is really about the idea or the understanding that when you engage from a positive perspective, things tend to turn out more positive. Case in point, I do some community workshops, and one of the questions I would ask is, why are you doing X, whatever X is? It's a negative trait. Oh, well, my parents did it, and, I guess grandma did it, grandpa did it. This is how we do it. Well, what are the outcomes? The outcomes are never too good. So what are the good things that you do to produce better outcomes? And they'll talk about a couple of things, and I'll say, well, why not use those good things as a platform to build everything else? And what tends to happen when you use that positive aspect, the negative things fade away. It's almost intuitive that it will happen. I'm no longer focusing on the negative, right? Even in the conversations, we had a conversation earlier, and you're talking about young people in a home. How do I approach my children when something has not been done that should have been done? Do I flip the finger? Do I point the finger?
Right.
Or do I give them a positive engagement piece? Right? You give them the positive piece, and all of a sudden they're more engaged, they're more active with coming up with a solution.
And isn't that very, very small thing an amazing catalyst for someone's whole life, really?
Yeah. Well, for me, Doug, and I guess for many other people that really stop and think about it, when you engage from a positive perspective, there's less arguments.
True.
There's less resistance, right? We're not struggling as much, and you begin to see that you get more things done. It's remarkable. For most of us, it doesn't take a lot of pushing and shoving. It just takes the right form of dialogue.
Right. Johnie, let's talk about 3 strategies for success that you use and that you think are important. And there are 3. They spell the word ACT.
Yes.
So the first is activate. The second is continuous, and the third is talents. So can you talk with our audience about those 3 strategies and how they can fit into our lives?
Well, you think about the acronym. ACT. Just do it. Right? And many of us have a challenge just doing it because sometimes we're concerned that it won't turn out the way we hope it would. But if you don't activate your process, it'll never turn out the way you want it to, typically. I had a grandparent that used to say, you don't know what you don't know.
True.
Right? My granddad, I love my granddad, and he called me Sugar Man, and he used to say, hey, Sugar Man, you never know what you don't know. And I didn't realize what that meant until I got older. And it's about activation. Even when you're upset, even when you're nervous, when you're a little afraid, you have to have action in order to get past whatever it is you're doing and get to where you want to be. So you have to activate your process. You have to get involved in what it is you want to do. And it has to be a continuous process. And if it's not going in the direction you want it to go in, maybe you need to tweak it a little bit. But you have to continue with the activated process.
And that's the C.
That's the C. And as you do that, like I shared with you earlier, you begin to clarify or understand what your purpose is, your talent. And once you put these 3 things into action, it's very hard to be a failure, right? It's very hard not to succeed. You may always have to, and you should always tweak whatever your plan is. In business, we go by a business plan. A business plan is a living document. As an individual, you have a living document that you should use every day.
And yet many businesses write a business plan and put it up on the shelf.
Put it on the shelf. Looks
and
pretty.
5 years later, they have not tweaked it. They've not acted on it.
And many of them are struggling at that point.
They are.
So when you begin to look at that business plan or your plan of life, being a business, you use SWOT analogy. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Where are my opportunities? Where are my threats, right? And you use this acronym to help you understand those 4 things and continue to engage in a positive manner because we have opportunity every day.
So for our audience, if they were to engage upon a program of ACT, How would they do that practically? What would the first step be?
Well, for me, when you look at ACT, you have to understand that acronym of SWOT. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Where are your opportunities? Where are your threats? And as an individual, you have to understand those things, so when you get engaged in the ACT process, it'll be a make sense proposition. I tell my students all the time at Tri-C that a big part of your educational journey is to understand where your weaknesses lie so you can make them strengths, where your strengths lie so you can become stronger, right? The acronym helps you to kind of develop that plan and flex it a little bit. Flex it, by that I mean adjust it. Tweak it. As you go on, you'll find that maybe now you've developed this process that you thought you would develop later much sooner. So you should tweak the process. Maybe now some of the opportunities that you had, you've taken advantage of them, and they've opened up greater opportunities. So you have to tweak it so that you can continue to grow and move forward and become a stronger person in whatever your purpose is. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And really that kind of simplifies everything. I think what we've talked about today is very doable for people.
Absolutely.
It might just take a little bit of conversation, a little bit of thought, or maybe a lot of thought in some cases. In my case, maybe a lot of thought. But again, I think very, very doable.
Yes.
And just kind of an interesting story that you have. I'm really intrigued by the seeds that your godfather planted that have really now come to fruition.
Yes.
So Johnie, it has been a pleasure having you here today, and I hope our audience feels the same.
Thank you, Doug. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Johnie.
Thank you.
I saw a recent news story on TV, and it showed the picture of a car that had been driven through a barrier into a batch of wet cement. Now the story continued and showed that all of the workers, the construction workers, had to work pretty quickly to move that car out of the wet cement, obviously, before it hardened. The car was in up to the hubcap, so it was quite an ordeal. The driver actually was shown getting out of his car laughing. And why did this occur? Because he was on his cell phone. Think I have another pet peeve? People on their cell phones and driving? Multitasking, folks, does not work.